in the wonderful, wonderful chapter 40 of Isaiah. We all know it. Should all know it. It's got a lot of prophetic language in it for Jesus, messianic language. But we always have to remember, they didn't know anything about a Messiah when this was being written and declared to them. So what did it mean to them, and what ultimately does it mean to us? Now, some of what we are looking, or most of what we'll look at tonight, is prophetic to what will happen, which, from what I study and read, is giving prophecy to Cyrus when he finally shows up on the scene. If you remember, they go through the exile, and they live in these foreign lands, and there's a series of political turnover that happens from the Assyrians to the Persians, to the Babylonians, and then ultimately the Persians. And it is the Persians under Cyrus that allow for this group to return. And so we're kind of in that era. This is 150 years after this is written or recorded. And so we have a chance to look at what is God promising his people after all of this happens in the exile. What is going to be the restoration? We've come across this theme now several times since we began Isaiah. We saw it in Amos. We saw it in Micah. This is a prevalent theme that God wants his people to know, that although you have to go through these sufferings, and in here it's called a double portion, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Although you had to go through all of these things, I am not going to leave you. I'm not going to forsake you. You're going to go triumphantly back to the place that I've given you. So that's where we're at tonight. And so this passage, the first few passages and the end, you've heard in reference in the New Testament referencing Jesus. John uses this language, John the Baptist, in the words of John the Baptist and others. So it says, comfort my people. So I love that line. We live a life today. They lived a life then when they were in exile, where everything was kind of pensive. We live in an age of anger. If there's anything that'll mark the early 21st century, it'll be that we were an angry people. And here, these people had gone through total reshuffling of life, and they were never comfortable. They were never at peace with where they were. And so here, God is calling out, saying, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem. Jerusalem, by this time, had been left in ruins. Okay, and we know that it was still in ruins. When we look at Ezra and Nehemiah, they go back to a city in ruins. So he says, speak tenderly to Jerusalem and announce to her that her time of hard service is over. Her iniquity has been pardoned, and she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. So it's both a physical reality, but this is also speaking of spiritual reality. So the exile you've been in spiritually, the exile you've been away from the land, it's over now, and a new day is about to begin. So he says, in that double portion for all her sins, it's not like God piled on for the things that she had done. What he's saying is here that the punishment is complete. So we're looking at about 150 years in the future when all of this happens. It's over now. Punishment's over, and you're going to go triumphantly back to Jerusalem. And then we have this. A voice of one crying out. We're familiar with this passage, right? Prepare the way of the Lord in the wilderness. Make a straight highway for our God in the desert. Every valley will be lifted up, and every mountain and hill will be leveled. The uneven ground will become smooth, and the rough places a plain. So where do we know this from? John the Baptist, when he's preaching. And he declares this. But what did it mean to these folks? So who's returning? Who's going through the wilderness?
The remnant?
Yeah. Israel's returning to Jerusalem. They are the ones, okay, that are going to go back to Jerusalem. So God is saying, prepare the way for these that are going. Now we see it used in two ways. We see it used as an ideal individual that represents all of Israel. That would be Jesus. That would be Jesus. That we're looking.
Cyrus then?
No, Cyrus was. He was not a messianic figure. He just allowed for them to be released.
Okay.
The other thing that it could be saying is this is the ideal Israel at work, living out life. Okay? And it's God is actually saying, prepare this way. My people are coming. Okay? So it can refer to the people, and it most definitely did refer to his nation at this time. But ultimately, John the Baptist uses it as a passage that prepares for the coming of Christ. Okay? The ideal Israelite preparing the way. Okay? So we get both meanings here, and rightfully so, because it's speaking to two different times. So it says, make straight a highway for our God in the desert. Why does it mention God? Because God is with his people now. The separation is over. The marriage has been renewed, if you want to look at it in that way. Every valley will be lifted up, and every mountain hill will be leveled. The uneven ground will become smooth, and the rough places plain. And the glory of the Lord will appear, and all humanity together will see it, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. So he's saying here, when this happens, the world's going to know it's happening. This is not going to be, you're not just going to sneak back in to town, or it's not going to be an uneventful moment in human history, and it wasn't. There was real drama that existed around, which we've already gone over in Ezra and Nehemiah. There was real drama that was circulating around that whole event of returning. Now we may look at Ezra and Nehemiah and say, wasn't very glorious. Things didn't go quite as glorious as we might think. All right, but physically, maybe not. But there was some real advancement going on spiritually in the lives of the people. So we have both parallel tracks being lived out. We tend to look at the external, but the passage also allows us to look at what God's really concerned with, and that's what's going on in our hearts. So it says, a voice saying, cry out, and another said, what should I cry out? And this is kind of like the prophet and God calling out to each other. And this is what God says. All humanity is grass, and all its goodness is like the flower of a field. The grass withers, the flowers fade, but the breath of the Lord, when the breath of the Lord blows on them. Indeed, the people are like grass. The grass withers, the flowers fade, but the word of our God remains forever. So you've heard that passage before, right? What's he describing here? What is life without God? What is life by our own devices and our own design? He describes it as this. It's like grass. Okay? It's like a flower. A hot wind can blow for just a moment, and the flower and the grass is withered. It's not good for anything. Jesus refers to these same ideas in some of the Sermon on the Mount. What really matters is two things. The most important being the word of our God remains forever. So if you're a human being and you want your life to matter, what do? You follow the word of God. I mean, that's as simple as it gets. God has two functions in this passage. One is the Spirit of God blows and they wither. Okay, so the Spirit has an activity. If your life is if you are self-directing your life, if it is focused on the things that you've decided are desirable and important, all the Spirit has to do is blow, and it's gone. Doesn't matter anymore. Okay. But if you want to remain forever, if you want to keep that kind of interaction from God determining your life, because why does God allow for things to continue to happen that are useless? Why does he allow that for us now? Because of the hope that we have in salvation in Christ Jesus. At any point in time, somebody can say, I believe, and all of life can change. But before Jesus, there was none of that. If you were a useless, wasteless life, God says, let's just go ahead and get you out of here. Really. And we know that he gave them many chances. Multiple chances to get it right. And they still didn't get it right. So he says, okay, I'm going to do away with that. I'm going to rise up, what you mentioned a while ago, a remnant. And that remnant is going to be the people who live by the word of the Lord. They will remain forever. So that's kind of the choices that existed here. And it really does exist the same way for us. We just have a life that is misdirected and futile until the day that we surrender to Christ. And hopefully that's in this life and not the next, where every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. Okay, so Zion is a mountain, right? Zion, herald of good news, go up on a mountain. So the vision here is you that have been given the responsibility of declaring Yahweh to the world, find the highest spot that you can find, okay, and declare. All right, so it says, Jerusalem, herald of good news, raise your voice loudly. So find the highest spot and raise your voice loudly. Raise it, do not be afraid. Say to the cities of Judah, here is your God. Okay? So that's right. And then, okay, so now we have this passage that leads us into God has restored everything. And he's shown his strength and he shows his compassion. And what is it? I just never will understand why it treats me this way. Here we go. So now he's like he's in a conversation with someone that would say, okay, what makes you so great? So, of course, nobody asked that question, but the question is there. Everything that has happened to his people, they've gone into exile, all these various things have been allowed to happen to discipline them and chastise them and to open up their hearts to him in a way that goes beyond the superficial level that it was. Okay, and now you say you're going to do all these things. That's kind of where the question comes from. This has been going on now for exile was almost 100 years, and the question may be, now you're going to do something. What reason is there to believe? What reason is there to think that you're the God that can do this? So we're back into this struggle that existed at the beginning, which was what? There's the one true God, and there's these idols that exist. Okay, so we're kind of rushed back in to, okay, you've told us that sometime in the future we're going to be coming home. Okay, so why should we put our trust in that? We're still here in the land. We've still got our idols. We've still got these foreign gods. Prove yourself, kind of. And so that's what he begins to do. He says, and this language will be familiar from Job. Much of this language is a lot like God's answer to Job when Job calls him out. And of course, Job had been around a while when this had been written. It's still considered the oldest written volume in the Bible. So he says, who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, or marked off the heavens with the span of his hand? Who has gathered the dust of the earth in a measure, or weighed the mountains on a balance and the hills on the scales? Who has directed the Spirit of the Lord? Who gave him counsel? Who did he consult? Who gave him understanding and taught him the paths of justice? Who taught him knowledge and showed him the way of understanding? So the question is going to be, who's done all this? God did it. Who's been counseling God? Nobody. Okay? So not only is it me, I'm the only me. There's no mini me, there's only me. So he says, look, the nations are like a drop in a bucket. They're considered a speck of dust on the scales. He lifts up the islands like fine dust. Lebanon cedars are not enough fuel, or its animals enough for a burnt offering. All the nations are nothing before him. They are considered by him as empty nothingness, meaning this. It's not that he doesn't love people. It's the power upon which those nations attempt to stand that are nothing to him. The nationalistic fervor of the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and the Persians was a thing of nothingness to God. With whom will you compare God? What likeness will you set up in comparison with him? An idol? Something that a smelter casts and a metal worker plates with gold and makes silver chains for? So he's saying here, what are you going to do? Who will you compare to God? One of these idols that you keep making? A poor person contributes wood for a pedestal that will not rot. He looks for a skilled craftsman to set up an idol that will not fall over. So he's describing the pitifulness of worship an idol. Some poor guy brings in a piece of wood to somebody that can cover it with metal and put a stand underneath it so at least it won't fall over. So he says, do you not know? Have you not heard? Has it not been declared to you from the beginning? Have you not considered the foundations of the earth? God is enthroned above the circle of the earth. Its inhabitants are like grasshoppers. He stretches out the heavens like a thin cloth and spreads them out like a tent to live in. So he's describing this God as this transcendent, overlooking everything. Even the sky is laid out as a thin garment for him. He reduces princes to nothing. Same thing about the power. Power relied in the princes. Reduce them to nothing. It makes judges of the earth like a wasteland. We've already talked about how judges have put themselves in place of power really to defraud and to eviscerate the poor in a real sense. So he says he makes them nothing. They are barely planted, barely sown. Their stems hardly take root in the ground. When he blows on them and they wither, and a whirlwind carries them away like stubble. So we go back, okay? How do you want to live? You want to live this self-directed, self-appointed life. What God does is he comes in and he blows that away. Or you can live by his word and live forever. Now he's describing what he does with these pagan idol worshiping nations. They're going to get the bad blow, and they're going to wither and blow away. It says, to whom will you compare me? Or who is my equal? Asks the Holy One. Look and see. Who created these? Who brings out the stars by the number? or calls them all by name, man, that's going to be, I'm back on James Webb, but going to meet God one day and he's going to have all them stars named. I mean, and there's so many of them. It's like, okay, talk about taking in forever to count and name the stars. But yeah, no big deal to him. He calls them by name because of his great power and strength. Not one of them is missing. Okay, so the cosmos is held together by his power and strength. If his power and strength wasn't there, the implication here was just all fly apart. See? Yeah. Jacob, why do you say, and Israel, why do you assert, my way is hidden from God, and my claim is ignored by God? So here we are, kind of in that argument that I was speaking of earlier. Okay, is God really paying attention? Does he have any right to be able to say what he's saying? And that's what he's saying. I'm hidden from God. My claim to God, he doesn't even hear. He says, so do you not know, have you not heard, the Lord is the everlasting God? Meaning, how are you ever going to avoid God? And how is he ever going to avoid you? He's the creator of the whole earth. He never becomes faint or weary. There is no limit to his understanding, meaning, why would he ignore you? Why do we ignore people? Too tired to deal with them. Right? Oh, you look at your phone. Oh, boy, I don't have time for that. Okay? Because we don't have the strength, the courage, the patience, anything. So we ignore him. God said, he can't ignore you. This is who he is. He never becomes faint or weary. There is no limit to his understanding. It's not like he doesn't know what to do or how to answer you or how to deal with you. He gives strength to the faint. We all know this passage. Okay? So what's God's business with us? When we find that we feel like we're at the end. We're dejected. Nobody loves me. Everybody hates me. All that stuff that goes on. God's forgotten all about me. I know I may deserve it, but still, I got to get through the rest of my life. I can't do it without him. So here he is. He says, God, gives strength to the faint. When you're faintful, don't worry about it. He's going to give you strength. You may become faint and weary, meaning that you become tired before your time. Life, we always look at this and what does that mean? It's one of the most famous passages quoted, but what does it mean when youth become faint and weary? I've raised some in my house and they don't become faint or weary. They're like water bugs and super balls that bounce across the wall. Okay, what's that mean? It means that you become weary before your time. Life has beat you down way before it should have. So what does this mean here? It says youth may become faint and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who trust in the Lord will renew their strength. So there's no reason to believe, if you're with God, that you ever lose the strength to get through life. Why? He's providing the strength for one reason. It says that those who trust in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar with wings like eagles. Okay? They will run and not become weary. They will walk and not faint. So I read that last little, they will. And I think of Elijah. Elijah just had this energy, okay, physical energy. But then he reached this point. His spiritual energy fell out the bottom one day. Felt like he was going to be killed at any moment. Everybody hates me. Nobody loves me. There's nobody left. And God comes to him, and what does he do? Fixes him a meal. And then takes him to his house and says, meet me there. We'll get this spiritual stuff worked out too. So that's how he deals with us. Same way, really. So they're coming back. The prophecy is you're going to return. And the mind is, oh, really? What's God going to do with us once we return? Does he have any claim on us after all that he's put us through? He says, of course that he does. He loves you. He's going to carry you, and he's going to provide you strength. And all of this will happen together, because as he is doing that, you are shouting from the mountaintop, our God is here. And it's not just something that you say, it's the very thing that you're experiencing. So you're saying it from up here, and then under here, the foundation, you're experiencing all that he describes right here. So does that make sense? So we see this passage and we think of Jesus. Naturally, there's passages here about preparing for the way of Jesus, and we look at him. We use this last part of this as the strength that God provides us, and that's often equated with Jesus and his overcoming of our sin. But it had real meaning to their lives and the practicality of how are we going to live out our everyday life with God. And he shows them, and we get that same lesson. So we have to go back to BC times in order to get the full measure of what God is showing us, beyond just the messianic tune that it plays for Jesus, which is important, of course. We wouldn't be looking if it wasn't for Jesus. We'd be at the ball field watching a ball game, or who knows what we'd be doing. I don't know. So verse 40, in chapter 40, there's a hint of the idol business. We went over that. And if you recall, prophets in these particular era prophets always introduce a subject subtly, and then you'll come across a passage that just expands it so that you get the full volume of what's happening. And that's what happens in chapter 41. So we'll run through this. It says, "Be silent before me, coast and islands, and let peoples renew their strength. Let them approach. Let them testify. Let them testify. Let's come together for a trial." So here we are. He's gathered up his people. There's going to be a trial, and there's going to be witnesses that are going to happen here. So what is he saying? Be silent before me, coast and islands. Even in the place where there is few inhabitants. Okay? Listen. Listen to what you're about to be told. Okay? So it's for everybody. Who has stirred up someone from the east? Who was from the east? All the invaders were from the east. Okay? And Cyrus especially was from the east, as far east as they knew, but he had conquered everybody to the north. So we have two references here. It says, oh, did I lose it? Let's see. Who has stirred up someone from the east? I did, God says. In righteousness he calls him to serve. The Lord hands nations over to him, and he subdues kings. Sounds like Cyrus to me. He makes them like dust with his sword, like wind-driven stubble with his bow. He pursues them, going on safely, hardly touching the path with his feet. Who has performed and done this, calling the generations from the beginning? I am the Lord, the first and the last. I'm he. So all this stuff that you will experience that's happening with this great king, happens to be Cyrus, that comes through, and it happens. He's talking about his feet barely touched the ground. When Cyrus got to moving south, it happened quick. There was nowhere to run. There was nowhere else to turn. So he says, who's going to do all this? I'm doing this. The coast of the islands see and are afraid. The whole earth trembles. They approach and arrive. Each one helps the other and says to the other, take courage. The craftsman encourages the metal worker. The one who flattens with the hammer encourages the one who strikes the anvil, saying to the soldering of the soldering, it is good. He fastens it with nails so that it will not fall over. So what's he saying here? The minute trouble comes, where do they run? To the idol makers. Let's fashion us up some kind of God to deal with this, okay? But you, Israel, my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, descendant of Abraham, my friend, I brought you from the ends of the earth and called you from its farthest corners. I said to you, you are my servant. I have chosen you. And I haven't rejected you. Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be afraid, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will hold on to you with my righteous right hand. So again, we're back. And all this is going to go on. Rest assured, you're my servant. You're my friend. And I'm going to take care of you. Now, when you look at extra biblical material about what happened to other nations that Cyrus conquered, it didn't turn out so great for them. Israel really was treated in a way that was special. And you couldn't really give any reason for it other than, Cyrus shows up and says, hey, why don't y'all go back and rebuild the temple? And by the way, here's a bunch of stuff to do it. And we'll send an army with you to protect you, which was rejected by Israel. He didn't want an army. So everything was going right, and it was just simply because of passages like this where God says, don't worry, don't fear, I'm going to be with you. Be sure that all who are enraged against you will be ashamed and be disgraced. Those who contend with you will become nothing and will perish. You will look for those who contend with you, but you will not find them. Those who war against you will become absolutely nothing. For I am the Lord your God who holds your right hand, who says to you, do not fear. I will help you. Do not fear, you worm Jacob. Anybody's Bible say anything different? You weakling, maybe? Sometimes it's translated weakling. Do not fear, for you are weak, Jacob. Or you worm Jacob, you men of Israel. I will help you. This is the Lord's declaration. Your Redeemer is the Holy One of Israel. So I will make you into a sharp threshing board, new with many teeth. You will thresh mountains and pulverize them and make hills into chaff. So here we have this image again of everything's going to be flattened and made low when God shows up and does his work. So you know what a threshing board is, right?
It's like a threshing floor.
Yeah, what they would do with these threshing boards, they would lay the wheat out, and it would beat them. Yeah, and it had teeth on it, and it would break up the head. So you just bam, 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 and then you took a winnowing fork and you threw it up in the air, and the wind would catch it and blow away all the stuff you didn't want, and the grain would fall back on the threshing floor. So the threshing floor was made of stone, and these items were made of hardwood or had iron teeth and stuff. And they were usually up on a hill. And why was that?
Wind.
The wind. That's right. So you throw it up and the wind would blow and get rid of all that. So he's saying that I'm going to make you that. Okay? So what is he saying? He's saying I'm going to use you.
Separate the good from the bad.
Separate the good from the bad. That's a New Testament theme if there ever was one, right? John the Baptist speaks of it. Jesus speaks of it. Okay? In fact, John the Baptist says he's coming with his winnowing hook. And he's going to separate the wheat from the chaff. So it's kind of the same kind of thing here. They say, you will winnow them, and the wind will carry them away. A whirlwind will scatter them. But you will rejoice in the Lord. You will boast in the Holy One of Israel. So God's going to carry out his justice through his people. All right? The poor and the needy seek water, but there is none. Their tongues are parched with thirst. So he's describing this trip back home. And when you go through the wilderness, what are you lacking? Water. Okay? He says, I'm the Lord. He says, first he says, I will answer them. I am the Lord, the God of Israel. I will not abandon them. I will open rivers on their barren heights and springs in the middle of the plain. So what did God do when they had left Egypt and they were wandering around and they were without water? He told Moses, go over there, speak to that rock, and you'll get water. Yeah, but he was mad. So he went and struck the rock. Still got water, but it kept him out of the promised land. Okay? So there was life for them, but at that point, Moses' life in the new land dried up. There was no way for him to go. But he says, I will open up rivers on the barren heights and springs in the middle of the plains. I will turn the desert into a pool and dry land into springs. I will plant cedar, acacia, myrtle, and olive trees in the wilderness. I will put juniper, elm, cypress trees together in the desert, so that all may see and know, consider and understand that the hand of the Lord has done this. The Holy One of Israel has created it. So what's he describing here? You reach this point where you feel like you're walking back into really death, dry, parched land, into a city that's been abandoned and deserted for 75 years. Okay? And you're going to return to this. And what am I going to do? On your way,
He's going to fix it.
yeah,
You create it.
I'm going to provide you life in this. You're going to have water. And every kind of tree that's worth anything is going to just sprout up and start growing. Okay, so very symbolically of what am I doing? Life is coming back to my people, and it's going to flourish. And this is something that God, he says, has created it. So this is a new reality. The old is gone, the new has come. Just like Paul says in 2 Corinthians. Same thing here. The old Jerusalem, that old wishy-washy, syncretistic, worshiping everything city, it's gone. Those people, they're gone. What I'm bringing back is a people that are going to live their life in my life, what I provide. They're going to shout it from the mountaintops that I'm here with them. See, this is the wonderfulness of it. So that's God's case. So he says, now present your case, or submit your case. Present your arguments, says Jacob's king. Let them come and tell us what will happen. Tell us the past events, so that we may reflect on them and know the outcome, or tell its future. What's God saying? He's saying, look, I know everything has happened, and I know why the future's happened. Based on what you can, based really on what has happened, but you don't know. You can't tell that the future, how the future was built on the past, but I can. Tell us the coming events. Then we will know that you are gods with a little g. Indeed, do something good or bad, then we will be in awe when we see it. Of course, what is he talking to here? He's speaking of handmade idols that they would bow down to, and cut themselves, and all kind of things. Look, you're nothing, and your work is worthless. Anyone who chooses you is detestable. This would have been detestable not just in God's eyes, but just in life. Abhorrent is another way of describing that, or an abomination. I have stirred up from the north, and he has come. One from the east who invokes my name, Cyrus. He will march over rulers as if they were mud, like a potter who treads the clay. Who told about this from the beginning, so that we might know, and from times past, so that we might say he is right? No one announced it. No one told it. No one heard your words. I was the first to say to Zion, look, here they are. And I gave Jerusalem a herald with good news. When I look, there is no one. There is no counselor among them. When I ask them, they have nothing to say. Look, all of them are a delusion. Their works are non-existent. Their images are wind and emptiness. So that whole little passage that I struggle to read because I can't see the pronunciation. I can't see it. I got to go back to the doctor, I think. Commas look like periods. So what he's saying here is these idols can't tell you anything, can't tell you what happened, can't tell you what will happen, can't tell you the meaning behind anything that has happened. So he says it's all a delusion. It's all non-existent. It's all just emptiness. Much the same way that Solomon described life when he became involved more in the political nature of his kingdom than he did the spiritual nature. He wrote Ecclesiastes saying, "Oh man, vanity of all vanities. What a waste." You know, and God's saying, "Yeah, you live like that. What a waste." And of course, we don't like to give Solomon too much bad press because we consider him the wisest man that ever lived. But he did end his life with 600 wives and worshiping idols. So he, if he was the wisest man that ever lived, it doesn't make you perfect by any means. And so some of this is what God is describing for us. You get yourself wrapped up in the things of this world, no matter what your God looks like, it's going to return to you emptiness. It can do nothing to teach you about the past, and it can do nothing to prepare you for the future. All it can do is leave you wanting. Okay, so the servant's mission. Here we have another passage that is dual in the sense that it speaks of Israel and its mission at the time that this was written, and also speaks to the ideal Israelite, Jesus, and what that mission will be. So he says, "This is my servant, I will strengthen him. This is my chosen one, I will delight in him. I have put my spirit on him. He will bring justice to the nations. He will cry out and shout, or make his voice, he will not cry out or shout, or make his voice heard in the streets." So this is a reference to how things were often done at the time. If you wanted to convince people that you knew something, what do? Just get in the street and shout about it. Okay, just cry out and shout. So Facebook is the modern day this. See, you just get online and you just start shouting, and you know people will shout with you until somebody decides that you can't shout anymore. We're going to cut you off. But we'll let these other people shout because we like what they're shouting about. So this is what he said. No, my guy is not going to have to do that. There's going to have to be no shouting going on here. He doesn't have to draw attention to himself. He's not going to cry out. He doesn't have to make his voice heard in the street. He will not break a bruised reed. He will not put out a smoldering wick. Okay, what is he talking about here? He's talking about those that are helpless, okay, and that life is really, what's the way to put it? There should be a fire there. There should be life there, but all that's left is smoke. Okay, so this one that's coming, he's going to treat those vulnerable and helpless and hurting people in a way that doesn't hurt them. Okay. He says he will not grow weak or be discouraged until he has established justice on the earth. The coast and islands will wait for his instruction, meaning that even those that are far away and sparse in the land are going to wait. They're going to want to know and want to hear from this guy. So he's speaking both to Israel when they come back to Jerusalem and they reestablish themselves. This is their mission. But it also speaks to Jesus. Very early on, very soon after this was written, while they were in exile, the priest and others were looking for a man that would fulfill this because the nation had failed so poorly. So, but the writing speaks to both. But there was a forward thinking, looking for, surely there's going to be one that can accomplish this, because it's often spoken to in singular language here. So both are appropriate. This is what God, the Lord, says, who created the heavens and stretched them out, who spread out the earth and what comes from it, who gave breath to the people on it, and spirit to those who walk in it. I am the Lord. I have called you for a righteous purpose. I will hold you by your hand. Second time he's talked about this. I will watch over you, and I will appoint you to be a covenant for the people, a light to the nations, in order to open blind eyes, to bring out prisoners from the dungeon. So, God's call to his people was, you're going to be a new covenant between me and the nations, the Gentile nations. The very people that you were in exile to are going to be the very people that you call out to bring them to me. And of course, Jesus is in that same vein. Jesus comes as, he calls himself what? On the night that he's betrayed. He says, this is the blood of what? A new covenant. So he says, you will be a covenant for my people. Okay? He bring out their oppressors from the dungeon, and those sitting in the darkness from the prison house. I am the Lord, that is my name, and I will not give my glory to another, or my praise to idols. The past events have indeed happened. Now I declare new events. I announce them to you before they occur. So everything that happened, I made happen. I told you before it was going to go that way, and it did. And he says they have happened, but now new things are about to happen. So, did Israel ever perform its duty to bring the nations to God? Was there anytime?
I don't think they have.
Never have. See, so the only fulfillment that we experience in this, although the people were given the same charge, the only place where we ever find the fulfillment of any of this is in the life of Jesus. And did he claim it for himself? No. It was recognized in him. He didn't have to cry out about it. It was just declared of him. Even those who questioned him tended to bring up the question, do you say that you're the Son of God? Okay? Because by this time, Messiah and the Son of God had rightfully been worked out to be the one person. So even those that opposed him recognized enough of who he was to ask that question. But their reason for asking was not in hopes of discovering that God had indeed was with them, but that they could use it against him. That's how upside down they had become about the law, really about what was in the law and the prophets. So then he goes on in verse 10. This is often called a song of praise, but there's no evidence that it was ever sung, but it does mention song. So sing a new song to the Lord, sing his praise from the ends of the earth. You will go down to the sea with all that fills it, your coast and islands with your inhabitants. Let the desert and its cities shout. The settlements of Kedar dwells, where Kedar dwells, cries aloud. Let the inhabitants of Selah sing with joy. Let them cry out from the mountaintops. Let them give glory to the Lord and declare his praise on the coast and islands. The Lord advances like a warrior. He stirs his zeal like a soldier. He shouts, he roars aloud. He prevails over his enemies. So this is again a victory march into and back to being the people that God had called him to be from the very beginning. I have kept silent from ages past. I have been quiet and restrained myself, but now I will groan like a woman in labor, grasping breathlessly. I will lay waste mountains and hills and dry up all their vegetation. I will turn rivers into islands and dry up the marshes. I will lead the blind by a way they did not know. I will guide them on paths they have not known. I will turn darkness to light in front of them and rough places into level ground. This is what I will do for them, and I will not abandon them. They will be turned back and utterly ashamed, those who trust in an idol and say to a cast image, you are our gods. Okay? So this is lifting up his people. Once they were blind, but now I'm going to bring them on a path they never dreamed they'd be on with me. And I'm reestablishing my relationship with them. But then he reminds them, this is the future, this is now. The reason why that can be true is because this is currently true. The reason why I can bring you out of your blindness is because you are currently blind. Listen, you deaf. Look, you blind, so that you may see. Who is blind but my servant, or deaf like my messenger I'm sending, Israel? Who is blind like my dedicated one, or blind like the servant of the Lord? Though seeing many things, you pay no attention. So see, you would never use this language about Jesus, would you? No. Not messianic at all. So who is it speaking of? It's got to be speaking about Israel and Judah. So, though seeing many things, you pay no attention. Though his ears are open, he does not listen. Because of his righteousness, the Lord was pleased to magnify his instruction and make it glorious. But this is a people plundered and looted, all of them trapped in holes or imprisoned in dungeons. They have become a plunder, with no one to rescue them, and loot, with no one saying, give it back. So, this is life in exile. Who among you will hear this? Let him listen and obey in the future. Who gave Jacob to the robber and Israel to the plunders? Was it not the Lord? Okay. So they've been carried off. We've talked about this now many times in these 3 chapters, that they're just the plunder. And that's why God is able to claim them previously as his wages and his reward. Have we not sinned against him? They were not willing to walk in his ways, and they would not listen to his instruction. So he poured out his furious anger and the power of war on Jacob. It surrounded him with fire, but he did not know it. It burned him, but he did not take it to heart. So all this happened, and God was doing it the whole time. He was telling him that he was doing it the whole time, but they did not listen. They didn't take it to heart. So let's look a little bit at our contemporary day, especially in our culture. You hear all the time, we're a Christian nation. But every nation in Europe one time would have said, we're a Christian nation. Okay? And you look at them today, and you can't name one that you would say, oh, that's a Christian nation. I want to model our life like them. It just doesn't exist. So God's never had a nation that he would point to and say, that's a Christian, or that's even a theodicy. Other than these people, he handpicked them, hand chose the place they would live, hand chose everything for them to do it exactly right, and they couldn't do it right. All right? So we live in a world, we just need to kind of X out that idea that this is how we're supposed to be. We truly are living how we are supposed to live because of the things that we trust in the world. We trust. Well, what do we trust? We're supposed to. Okay, some do. There's many millions that do, I think, live by their faith. But then there's many millions who claim a faith that do not live by that faith. Okay, and that becomes well, yeah. So what would that be? Government is one. We like the power of others making those hard decisions for us, or whatever they may. They don't even make hard decisions anymore. Yeah, buddy, money's a thing, but we're quickly finding out that money, when we've learned the lesson before, but we keep going back to it, we find out that money's really not all that terribly reliable. And the more that we borrow as a nation, then we know that it's less reliable. So government, power, money, we have things in our life that we tend to put first, and we don't even realize what God's doing around us. He's doing his best to warn us, while at the same time offered us his care. All of this is happening, but we're really not aware of any of it going on as a people. Even in the church, we're not fully aware. How do we overcome these things?
You gotta put God first.
He has to be first. But if he's first for me, or he's first for you, and he's not first for the rest of the community, then can he accomplish what he describes here in this passage? Because what we find is that the important thing is that we stand on the mountaintop and say, our God is here, okay? And that we're saying to the nations, our God is here. So one voice doing that is a whimper. And really, maybe it's meant to be that way. Jesus was the loudest voice, right? Mm-hmm. That our God was here, and he came to save us. But when he left, what did he do? He left us with the message, and he didn't leave it to just one or two. He left it to everybody.
But we haven't done a very good job.
We're not very good at it because we tend to, as human beings, just kind of slip back into that same thing. So it takes great effort. You can't just put this on autopilot like you can some other things. It takes a lot of effort. And the effort, Paul describes in Galatians, belongs to all of us. We're each to carry one another's load in regards to that. And so now we need reminding. Right? And that's what the writer's doing. He's reminding his people that this is the life that God intended, and you have it. Not only have you failed in it, you've muddied the water with these other gods, which he cannot abide. Why? If they're not real, why does God have so much trouble with false gods and idols? Yeah, but the commandments are for us. So why does he have so much trouble with it?
Because he's a jealous God.
Okay. Anything else? What good is it for us? I mean, God knows they're not real. He could just look at us and say, well, that's not real. They don't really know what they're doing. This is true. But how does it damage our life is what I'm getting to. When we're allowed to stay in that false, What were you going to say, Marcella?
Can't remember
Come on, you got my disease.
We destroy ourselves.
That's right. So the reason why he can't abide it is because it really leads to our ungodliness. You can't live as the image of Christ and have other things going on, other gods to look to, other things that are more important, other things that are defining. So that's the reason. He describes that poetically as being a jealous God because he loves us and he claimed us for his own. But the more that we remain in that place where we don't give him everything, it just harms us more. And we see the results of that today probably more than any time in my lifetime. We would hope it would have gotten better, but so much of even what happens in church today is confusing to a lot of people.
History's
Doctrine is,
History's going to keep repeating itself.
yeah.
Because We don't learn.
Yeah. Well, but I think sometimes instead of cycling in a circle, we've developed a wobble. And there's some places where we get further away from the correction than there is time in life to correct it. I really feel like we're in one of those seasons now in our when the majority of people that attend or that answer a survey, they're evangelical. When the majority of those people believe that Jesus is created, you can pretty much bet that there's a lot of misunderstanding about who God is in their life. And that's what all this is warning us about. We have to have a clear understanding of who God is in our life and want that for our life. But if we make up our mind that we can determine that, okay, Jesus is created, well, what does that do? Adios, muchachos. What does that do for us if we can ever say that Jesus